All right, so let's dive into this world of pinstripes and speakeasies and Tommy guns.
Sounds dangerous.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Today, we're going deep on Al Capone,
Mm-hmm.
the notorious gangster who ruled Chicago during Prohibition.
Right.
Now, you probably know the Scarface image,
Of course.
but we're going to go deeper than that, beyond the headlines,
Yeah.
to see how this kid from Brooklyn became one of the most powerful mobsters
That was powerful, really.
in American history, yeah.
What's really captivating about Capone's story is how closely it's tied to the unintended consequences of Prohibition.
Right.
The goal was to curb alcohol consumption,
Mm-hmm.
but instead it just created this massive black market,
Yeah.
which basically handed ambitious criminals like Capone a golden opportunity.
It's like they accidentally created a gangster's paradise.
Yeah.
But let's rewind a bit.
Okay.
Capone wasn't born into this life of crime, was he?
No, he wasn't.
He started out as a regular kid in Brooklyn.
And he did.
Right.
Born in 1899. To Italian immigrants, Capone's early life wasn't exactly glamorous.
Right.
But even as a kid, he had this rebellious streak.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he actually dropped out of school at 14
Oh, wow.
for hitting a teacher.
Wow, I guess detention wasn't really his style.
No, I don't think so.
So how does a kid who punches teachers end up becoming a mob boss?
Well, that's where his path takes a turn.
Okay.
Dropping out of school led him to street gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where he crossed paths with Johnny Torrio,
Yeah.
a seasoned criminal who became kind of a mentor to young Al.
Ah, Johnny Torrio.
Yeah,
The OG gangster mentor.
the original gangster, right?
I bet he taught Capone a thing or two about more than just throwing punches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Torrio recognized Capone's potential
Mm-hmm.
and saw that he was more than just a street tough.
Okay.
So he schooled him in, I guess you could call it, the finer points of organized crime.
Uh-huh.
Strategy, negotiation, building alliances.
Right.
It's almost like a, criminal mastermind's apprenticeship. Yeah.
So it was more than just brute force. Capone was learning the business side of crime, the art of the deal.
But with, a bit more danger involved.
Yeah, very much so.
For sure.
It's interesting to consider how different Capone's life might have been
Right.
if he hadn't met Torrio.
It's true. Mentorship can really shape a person's trajectory,
It can.
even in the criminal underworld.
Absolutely.
Now, we can't talk about Capone without mentioning his infamous nickname, Scarface.
Of course not.
How did he get that one?
Well, while working as a bouncer
Okay.
for another gangster, Frankie Yale,
Mm-hmm.
Capone made a, shall we say, snide remark
Uh-oh.
to a female patron.
Okay.
Her brother took offense
I can imagine.
and slashed Capone across the face,
Yeah.
leaving him with 3 distinctive scars.
3 scars. I guess Scarface just sounds a bit more menacing.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of menacing, let's shift gears to Chicago.
Okay.
What drew Torrio and Capone to the Windy City?
Well, Chicago in the 1920s was this bustling metropolis,
Mm-hmm.
but it was also riddled with corruption.
Right.
Law enforcement was lax.
Oh,
The
yeah.
economy was booming.
Okay.
And it was really the perfect breeding ground for organized crime.
Yeah.
Torrio sensed this.
Mm-hmm.
And when Prohibition hit, he knew this was their chance
Okay.
to build an empire.
Prohibition really threw fuel on the fire, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Suddenly, alcohol was illegal,
Yeah.
creating this massive demand for bootleg liquor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Torrio, being the shrewd criminal that he was,
Mm-hmm.
brought Capone to Chicago to capitalize
Okay.
on this new, albeit illegal, market.
So they set up shop in Chicago.
They did.
But how did they manage to turn this opportunity into a full-blown criminal enterprise?
Right.
I mean, they weren't exactly running a legitimate business.
No, they were masters of exploiting the system.
Okay.
They established these elaborate smuggling routes,
Yeah.
bringing in booze from Canada and other parts of the U.S.
Okay.
They set up illegal breweries, ran speakeasies.
All while bribing corrupt officials to look the other way.
Okay, so bribery was definitely part of their playbook.
Oh, for sure.
Was there anything else that gave them an edge over their competition?
Well, Capone was ruthless
Mm-hmm.
and incredibly strategic in consolidating his power.
Okay.
One of his tactics involved posing as police officers.
What
during raids on rival gangs' operations.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. Imagine the chaos and confusion.
Ew.
It allowed him to eliminate competition,
Mm-hmm.
seize their territory,
Yeah.
all while appearing to be upholding the law.
That's devious.
Yeah.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
Right.
They're getting busted by the very people that they thought were protecting them.
Right.
But this cutthroat competition
Yeah.
must have created some serious tension, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it all came to a head in 1925,
Okay.
when Torrio himself was nearly killed in a mob hit.
Oh, wow.
The experience shook him,
Mm-hmm.
and he decided to retire, handing over the entire Chicago outfit. You guessed it.
Al Capone.
Al Capone.
Wait, so at just 26 years old, Capone is running the whole show.
He is.
That's a meteoric rise.
It is.
And with him at the helm, things were bound to get even more intense.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And we'll delve into that in just a moment.
Okay.
But before we do, what are your initial impressions of Capone so far?
Yeah.
Are you seeing him as a cunning strategist?
Mm-hmm.
A ruthless thug?
Yeah.
Or perhaps a bit of both?
It sounds like a little bit of both to me so far.
Yeah, he was a complex figure for sure. But we'll dive into more of that after a quick word from our sponsors.
All right. Sounds good.
He was a bit of both for sure.
Mm-hmm.
A brilliant mind behind a brutal facade.
Yeah.
And with him in charge, the Chicago outfit's grip on the city just tightened.
Okay.
He expanded into new ventures, controlling everything from gambling rings to prostitution,
Wow.
all while his bootlegging empire just flourished.
So he was basically the CEO of crime, diversifying his portfolio.
You could say that.
It sounds like he had his hands in everything illegal in Chicago.
He did.
Yeah.
Estimates suggest that his operations were pulling in around $100 million annually,
Wow.
which, adjusted for inflation, would be over $1.5 billion today.
That's an insane amount of money.
It is.
But here's what I find interesting. Capone tried to cultivate this image as a man of the people,
Yeah.
almost like a Robin Hood figure.
Right.
He donated to charities,
He did.
even opened soup kitchens during the Depression. Do you think there was any sincerity behind that?
That's a good question.
Or was it all just a calculated PR stunt?
It's a question that historians still debate. On the one hand, some argue that it was a genuine expression
Okay.
of his concern for the less fortunate, particularly those struggling during the Depression.
Yeah.
After all, he came from humble beginnings himself.
Right. So there's that element of maybe wanting to give back,
Yeah.
of understanding the struggles of everyday people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you can't ignore the strategic brilliance of it.
Right.
By presenting himself as this benefactor, he was softening his image,
Right.
garnering public support,
Yeah.
perhaps even influencing those in power to turn a blind eye to his criminal activities.
It's like he was trying to create this disconnect between the ruthless gangster and the charitable citizen.
Right.
Almost as if he was saying, look, I do bad things, but I also do good things.
Oh, yeah, I understand.
But this balancing act couldn't last forever, could it?
No, it couldn't.
The violence was too rampant.
Yeah.
Too much for anyone to ignore.
And his rivalry with George Bugs Moran,
Oh, yeah.
who ran the North Side Gang, really escalated the violence.
Oh,
Their feud was legendary
yeah.
and ultimately led to one of the most infamous events in gangster history,
Uh-huh.
the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Oh, yes, that one's etched in infamy.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine what it must have been like to live in Chicago during that time.
Oh, it would have been terrifying,
Yeah.
knowing these gangs were waging war on the streets. So tell us about the massacre. What exactly happened?
Okay, it was February 14th, 1929.
Okay.
7 members of Moran's gang were lured to a garage on North Clark Street,
Okay.
supposedly to receive a shipment of stolen whiskey.
Okay.
And they were lined up against the wall by men disguised as police officers.
Dressed as cops.
Yep.
That's chilling. They were completely caught off guard.
And then in a hail of bullets from Tommy guns,
Oh, wow.
they were brutally murdered.
That's awful.
The massacre sent shockwaves through the city and across the nation.
Yeah.
It was a blatant display of Capone's power
Mm-hmm.
and his willingness to use extreme violence to eliminate his rivals.
And even though Capone was in Florida at the time,
Right.
many believed he orchestrated the hit.
Many did.
And while he's never officially linked to the massacre, it solidified his reputation as a cold-blooded killer.
It did.
But here's the thing.
Yeah. This act of brutality,
Right.
meant to secure his power,
Right.
might have actually been the catalyst for his downfall.
That's an astute observation.
Yeah.
You see, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre turned public opinion against Capone.
Okay.
The pressure on law enforcement to bring him down intensified, and the federal government got involved.
Okay.
This is where Elliot Ness and his team of incorruptible agents,
Oh, yeah?
known as the Untouchables,
I've heard of them.
enter the picture.
Ah, the Untouchables. They were handpicked for their honesty
They were.
and determination to take down Capone. Their mission was to dismantle his bootlegging empire.
Right. Precisely. They targeted his breweries, his speakeasies, his smuggling routes,
Okay.
relentlessly chipping away at his organization.
So they weren't just going after the illegal booze.
No, they weren't.
They were also investigating Capone's racketeering operations.
They were.
You know those schemes where he extorted money from businesses through threats and intimidation?
Right, exactly.
So they were hitting him where it hurt, going after the money.
Yes.
But even with the Untouchables on his tail, Capone was still a formidable adversary.
Oh, he was tough to catch.
It seemed like he was always one step ahead.
He had a vast network of informants,
Okay.
corrupt officials on his payroll, and he was incredibly careful to avoid leaving a paper trail.
Yeah.
But while the Untouchables faced setbacks, they were instrumental in building a case against Capone,
Okay.
even if it wasn't in the way they expected.
So they weren't the ones to deliver the final blow.
No, they weren't.
Who ultimately brought down the seemingly untouchable Al Capone.
Yeah.
It wasn't bullets.
No.
It wasn't rivals
Nope.
that brought Capone down. It was something far less dramatic.
He was taxes.
Oh.
Taxes, exactly.
All right.
While Ness and his team were busy busting up breweries and speakeasies, a different group of federal agents were quietly building a case against Capone.
Okay.
The IRS.
The tax man.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It seems almost anticlimactic that a figure like Capone, who built his empire on violence and intimidation, would be brought down by something as mundane as taxes.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It might seem that way,
Yeah.
but it actually makes perfect sense.
Right.
You see, Capone was meticulous about covering his tracks when it came to his illegal activities.
Okay.
He didn't keep detailed records.
Right.
He avoided using banks, and he rarely put anything in writing.
Wow. He was good.
He was good at that,
Yeah.
but there was one thing he couldn't hide,
It's like
his income.
right. Everyone has to pay taxes, even gangsters.
Even gangsters.
Yeah.
And Capone lived lavishly. He had expensive cars,
Okay.
a luxurious estate,
Yeah.
and he wasn't shy about flaunting his wealth.
Of course not.
So the IRS saw this as a red flag
Mm-hmm.
and began digging into his finances.
So they were basically playing a game of financial forensics,
Yeah.
piecing together his income based on his lifestyle and spending habits.
That's a great way to put it. And they were good at their jobs.
Yeah.
The IRS was able to prove that Capone had a significant income that he hadn't reported.
Okay.
And in 1931, he was charged with tax evasion.
I can't imagine that Capone, the king of Chicago, took this lying down.
He didn't.
That-
He tried to fight the charges, claiming he had no idea how much money he was making or how taxes worked.
Oh, come on.
But the evidence was overwhelming.
Right.
And in the end, he was convicted
Wow.
on 5 counts of tax evasion.
So the man who had evaded bullets and rival gangs for years was finally brought down by a bunch of accountants with calculators.
It's ironic, isn't it?
It really is.
But it also highlights an important point.
What's that?
No one is above the law.
Not even Al Capone.
Not even Al Capone.
Wow.
Now, Capone was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison.
11 years.
He served time in Atlanta Penitentiary
Okay.
and later in Alcatraz, the infamous island prison.
Alcatraz. Talk about a fall from grace.
Right.
From ruling Chicago to being locked up in one of the most notorious prisons in America.
It was a humbling experience for Capone.
Yeah.
He was stripped of his power, his wealth,
Yeah.
and his freedom.
And while he was in prison, his health deteriorated.
It did.
Yeah.
He'd been suffering from syphilis for years.
Oh, wow.
And the disease began to take its toll.
So even though he escaped the violence of the streets,
Right?
his own body betrayed him in the end.
You could say that.
Yeah.
By the time he was released from prison in 1939, Capone was a shadow of his former self.
Wow.
He was mentally and physically debilitated
Oh, man.
and spent the rest of his days in seclusion at his estate in Florida,
Okay.
dying in 1947 at the age of 48.
What a dramatic rise and fall.
It is.
It really makes you think about the fleeting nature of power and the ultimate price of a life lived outside the law.
It does.
Yeah.
But Capone's story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's also a fascinating window into a turbulent period in American history.
Mm-hmm.
The Roaring Twenties, Prohibition, the rise of organized crime.
Yeah.
It's a story that continues to captivate us,
It does.
even decades later.
And it raises so many questions
It does.
about the unintended consequences of well-intentioned laws,
Right.
about the allure and dangers of power,
Mm-hmm.
and about the complexities of human nature.
Exactly. Capone was a ruthless criminal,
Mm-hmm.
but he was also a charismatic leader,
Right.
a shrewd businessman,
Yeah.
and to some, even a folk hero.
I can see that.
His story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's
Yeah.
full of shades of gray.
Well, I think we've done a pretty deep dive into the life and times of Al Capone today.
I think so.
We've explored his rise to power,
Mm-hmm.
his reign of terror,
Yes.
his dramatic downfall,
Uh-huh.
and his lasting impact on American culture.
His legacy lives on.
It definitely does.
And hopefully we've left you with a better understanding of this complex and controversial figure.
Thanks for joining us on this journey back to the Roaring Twenties.
My pleasure.
We'll leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Knowing how Prohibition inadvertently fueled organized crime, what are the potential unintended consequences of other well-intentioned laws or policies today?
It's a question worth considering
For sure.
because history has a way of repeating itself.
It does.
And as we've seen with Capone, even the most powerful empires can crumble
Yeah.
when they're built on a foundation of illegal activities.
So let's learn from the past
Yes.
and strive to create a future where good intentions lead to positive outcomes.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning,
Mm-hmm.
and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.